Okay, getting back to these extremely personal questions, which you don't have to answer, but just think about. How much do you make when you work? Presumably, most of us have jobs. Um, and how much of that gets, how much do you make for your employer versus how much do you make for yourself, right? Are you getting paid uh, the precise 100% equivalent of the value of your labor to your employer, or are you making less than what your employer? Are you making less for your employer what they pay you, or are you making more for your employer what they pay you? And this is hard to figure out, right? Because if you're a cashier at Walmart or something like that, there's maybe a dozen people doing that job for per shift. But how many $1 million are in sales are done? And if you're not there to sell it, they're not going to make any money. Um, is $100 million a year? Is that what their gross is? How much of that is profit? It's really hard to figure this stuff out. But um, you can if you work in the production line, it's easier to figure it out. You say, okay, yeah, the wholesale on this widget is blah blah blah, and so and their profit margin is thus, and we make 10,000 an hour, so that's what my team of 10 people is producing that much. So it's important to figure that out. My I'm going to tell you right now. If you are earning more than the value of your labor to your employer, you're not going to be working there very long because that's not how you run a business. You run the business always to pay the workers less than what their value of their labor is to the employer. That's the profit motive. If there's no profit motive, if there's no profit, what's the point? Um, and of course, we have periods of subsidy, new workers just starting out, etc. But for the most part, you got to pull your own weight, and that weight includes profit. That's the deal. Okay, so you have the workers, you have the bourgeoisie. The workers are the worker, the proletariat. The bourgeoisie is the capitalist. The increased value in the production process. This is not distribution oriented. This is production oriented analysis. The increased value from this comes the profit or surplus comes from the surplus labor of the proletariat within the production process. This is Marx's great argument. How does this work? And here I'm going to draw you a little factory. You'll see it here. There's your factory. Let me make this big so you can see it over on this side. There's your factory. The factory has cost. It costs some money. Um, that money comes from the capitalists. The person who puts up the cash to build the factory is paying money to build it. It's a very expensive thing. But a factory sitting empty uh, is no good. So you got to have workers who are hired to put their labor in. Basically, you are renting yourself as a worker to the capitalist, and you do what he tells you to do during that time that you're on duty. You are not only working, but you're giving your it's attentive labor. You're not spending time doing other stuff. You're doing what the owner tells you to do, and you're paid cash for that. The worker, the capitalist also covers that, the salaries or wages, and then you also have raw materials. So put RM over here, and it'll be a square. Squares are going to be objects. You have to bring in raw materials because you got to do something. You do something in that factory and you do it with the raw materials, and the raw materials are also paid for by that capitalist. So there's a lot of money outlay going on here, and not a lot of return yet. The fourth process is the widget, the commodity, the product. We'll put P down here, and we'll put squares around it. And there's the product, and the product has been produced, and the capitalist is still broke because they spent all their money on wages, on overhead, and on the raw materials, and all they have is a bunch of product piling up, right? Some of you know about DeLorean, the DeLorean cars, which were beautiful cars. They're made out of stainless steel, very, very heavy. They were underpowered. Nobody wanted them. And so they crushed most of them. That's why they're so expensive today, is because they were totally worthless. I remember seeing it on seeing it on in Newsweek back when I was a kid in 1984. They've got um, all of these DeLoreans headed to the crusher because they can't be sold. So even though you have a beautiful product, as long as nobody's paying anything for it, it is worth precisely zero. That is its value. Um, the moment when you have the money, when the worker gets paid the money, and you are holding the cash, and you can either buy or not buy. That's your moment of highest power. The power is with the money. The power is not with the commodity. The commodity has to be sold. If the commodity doesn't get sold, it depreciates. So you have a cart full of potatoes, and you come to your customer and you say, "Hey, I want to sell you these potatoes. They're worth $300, but I'll give them to you for 100." And the customer says, "No, I'm not going to buy them." And so then you go back to him tomorrow, or next week you go back with the same potatoes. You're like, "Okay, I'll give them to you for 50." He's like, 10. Right? Because the potatoes are rotting on the cart. And you say, 10? You were going to give me 50 last week. He's like, okay, 5. No, 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 10's fine. Because they're rotting, right? You need that money. You need the cash flow to keep you going. So here's the two factories. Why are there two factories? Because once the capitalist pays for the capital investment, it's sunk. It's sunk in that factory. Once they pay their suppliers are going to go pay their suppliers, right? The only people who have expendable income are the workers. The workers are over here with cash burning a hole in their pocket, and that's when the system actually turns into a capitalist system. They go over here and the they buy the product of the other workers, and they take their cash and they send it in exchange to the capitalist who produced it. There's that cash flow going that way. And these workers over here do the same thing. They buy the product of um, they buy the product of these guys over here. It goes that way, and their money goes back over to that capitalist. So it's a big figure eight. It's a big, however you do that. I can't do it backwards. It's a big figure eight. You gotta have product on one side and workers on the other, and workers on one side and product on the other, and the money has to keep circulating. This is absolutely key. If the money is not circulating, it's not a capitalist system. It's just money, right? It's not truly capital if it's not being going round and round and round in circles. So this is for Marx very important. It's a very dynamic model that he produces of the money circulating, and that resulting in a system that draws the surplus value from the labor's contribution. That extra little bit, what the difference between what this is sold for and what he paid these guys, that's the profit. Um, it's no longer buy low and sell high. It's buy that labor low and sell the product high in the same place. It's not you're not moving around. So, under industrial capitalism, workers sell their labor to the factory owner, who uses this labor to enable the production of goods, commodities, which the owner then sells at a profit. The means of production are the tools, technology, and materials necessary to manufacture commodities. Wages, money paid to the workers in exchange for their labor. They then spend this money on goods produced by other workers. Consumers, when workers buy back the items they have produced, they are buying the product of the labor of workers using the wages paid for their own labor, but both have been transformed through money. So you can see here all relationships between people are monetized. Now we go back to autonomous individuals and social contract theory. Where did this isolated individual come from that Locke was so sure was the original primitive man, right? And we know primitive men, in quotes, indigenous people, tribal people, hunter-gatherers are not isolated individuals. They are actually, they meet on that primordial plane, and of course they know each other because they're cousins. Haven't seen each other for 5 years or 10 years, but you never ever meet someone you don't know. Where did this alienation come from? It is the fact that let's see, this person. Let's get it back big again. Oh goodness, we're running out of time. 1 minute, we'll finish it up here. This person is connected to uh, that person only through money. We have economic relations between people and social relations between goods. Uh, if you Another way to think about it um, is if you think of where plastic came from. Where did this thing come from? This thing came from oil that was mined off the coast of Nigeria and then transported to New Orleans and cracked and turned into these filaments, and then further processed maybe in Gary, Indiana, in another plant, turned into plastic pellets, taken down the back down the Mississippi, taken through the Panama Canal, taken to Korea, and transformed into the models here, and then shipped over to China and transformed into assembled into these pens, and then transported back to Los Angeles, port of Los Angeles. There's workers here, thousands of workers all along the way producing this little pen that I hold so close, right? I hold it very close, and it's been touched by so many workers. This shirt that I own, this button was sewn on here by a teenager in Indonesia 10 years ago. She's really good at her job, but I never know her name. And you don't even know the name of the person who made this pen. You only know the name of the person who checked you out at Walmart. No, you don't, because you did the self-checkout. So we have no knowledge of the workers that we're buying their stuff. We're completely separated from these other workers, and that is where this alienation comes from, a result of the separation of workers from the means of production and social interaction with other workers. Marx argued was that workers became alienated. Having been separated out and individualized by the economy, the worker thus produced by industrial capitalism was the, quote, natural human being idealized by neoclassical economics. That's where it came from. It was the result, not the start. And we're at 12 minutes. Goodness.